Yeah, and I think in cities too, right, you become an object rather than a person. And it's kind of like this object that we've got to navigate around and get by past quickly, right? Rather than, oh, it's another human being. Let's learn stories. Let's learn who they are. Let's learn any lessons that they've picked up along the way, right? It becomes this kind of lamppost that we have to then evade and dodge by because you're 5 minutes late to a meeting and you've got to get there yesterday rather than in half an hour's time, right? And it just becomes this ever speeding up life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think about that from the perspective of time. And then you
Mm.
mentioned space because, things move. It seems things do move faster when there are more people around in a big city. So the perception of time, and then like you said, if you're on the road and you're trying to get somewhere, the amount of people in that space end up, creating this sense of, they're in the way. They're in the way
Mm.
of my day. They're in the way of me getting things done. So yeah, I think the travel outside of that and the space, taking the time and the space allows for this reset.
Mm.
It's yeah, it's needed. It's needed. I find that in my movement practice. I mean, that's, I would say, a big reason why I practice. It's also a big hurdle in the practice. Most of the excuses I hear from clients and students and excuses that I've made myself revolve around time and space. I don't have the time, I don't have the space. So recognizing that is in many cases an initial barrier, and then taking a step back, be like, wow, okay, maybe I do have time or space. Um, and then playing with those two constraints to allow for this ongoing creativity to emerge, this ongoing newness.
Yeah, I love how you call them students, right? Because I think skills are not conditional to the environment in which we learn them, right? We can apply them to many other things. And I think fitness is a great example of learning oneself or their interaction within space and time, and then applying it into a job, applying it into a family life, applying it into, whatever else they want to do, going out in a nightclub on the weekend or whatever they want to do, right? It's like, yeah, this is kind of base fundamental lessons that we probably need to learn, and we can then apply it to your everyday life.
Yeah, this is something I've been talking about and thinking on recently. The prioritization of the individual study, this meanness, making practice about you and what you want, and going into the direction of whatever that curiosity is,
Mm.
spending time there researching and allowing the space for that. And that may be a specific quality or a specific task or skill that's trying to be developed, or a general, let's say, a general kind of bucket of fitness outcomes. But those those moments are needed for self-discovery, self-exploration. And as you said, you could take those skills literally and apply them in the physical world outside of practice.
Mm.
But then oftentimes what I've found is that it's very there's very little discussion around skill as a vehicle for this ongoing development of body mind and what happens below the surface. So we know that, again, our external world is in many ways, mirror of the internal and vice versa. So if I'm building this map through skill development, then that map gets represented in every situation. So I use this analogy often with students of taking a compressed ball, and the compressed ball would be um, the current potential, the current, let's say from a movement perspective, the current allotment of skills that are available. Well, if I take 5 skills and I learn those skills, this ball actually starts to expand. I have more potential. And in that potential, I step into the ability to freely associate in new ways. So, for example, if in my practice, let's say I'm learning a handstand, which may seem just specifically relevant to learning a handstand, I actually can't see how the handstand carries into my ability to focus in the office, or my ability to make better decisions in relationship, or, you know, all of these things that exist inside of body mind start to reshape and reorganize based on the organization of the body through skills. So I think these things are less, because they're not a one for one. I can't say, oh well, that affected this, but we do know that as we learn the neural mapping, let's say, to kind of bring it down to that, it completely reorganizes. And so then there is, from that reorganization, new new elements that we can kind of move around and work with that maybe weren't there before. So it creates an opening in awareness, we could say.
Where did you arrive at that mindset and that philosophy in a way? How did you get there?
Uh, that you know what, I've not really looked back at. I would say it's the same thing that I just explained unfolding in me as I learn new skill, and as
Wow.
I combine the learnings of those skills with other areas of interest and research. So I do have, I've got a meditation practice, a movement practice. I have my, businesses that I run and manage and work with clients, students, et cetera. So um, I think one of the things that I realized long ago is that these all of these areas that we could say are compartmentalized elements or layers within life are actually not. There's no boundary. And so at some point you start to recognize the reference in this expansion of, again, body mind through, let's say, a physical practice, and its carryover into something like a meditation practice, or again, relationship with self and other. So yeah, I think it's just happened along the way. And then for me, one of the things that's been interesting, just because practice is so much of a creative process, it is kind of a gold mine for my own personal insights. And so often when I'm practicing, if I do have the time and space, I'm not just trying to, like, quantify sets, reps, and get the work done. I find that these insights just arrive. So it's always retrospective. It's looking back, but it happens in the moment of me using my physical body, and then in that physical body element, there's usually, because they can't be separated. There's usually a coordination of, um, let's say, mental or coordinative kind of capacities that aren't just automated through, something repetitive.
Mm,
So I'm doing tasks that require me to think, essentially,
mm.
but think while using the body, because it's all kind of the same. So, anyways, to answer your question, I don't know. I just arrived at that through, other people, of course. Like, there have been people along the way, teachers of mine, that maybe have parts of this that they've shared, and it's like anything. I think we accumulate our own, you know, our own research through curiosity, and then we start to put it together in a way that is uniquely our own, and our own perspective.
Mm. We paraphrase thought, right? And then add on our own little twist, and it becomes yours, but not fully yours. The seed might have been planted by somebody else or a group of others, right? And this kind of school of thought that we've adopted ourselves within, and then your own experience just molds it into somewhere else. Since we last spoke, I read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, right? And it's been wanting to get my hands on this book for so friggin' long, and I finally found it, and I was like, all right, mega, let's give this a whirl. And it's awesome, man. You can see the influence, obviously depending on the version, the depiction that you pick up, right? But you can see the influence of past teachers and ancient Greece in there, and obviously he's Roman. So you're like, well, why would they be looking back to a civilization before that was arguably bigger and greater, and then they're trying to one up and become bigger and greater than them. You're like, well, that's the thing, we're this accumulation of knowledge, and we're just gathering it all in, right? And I think that's best expressed through the physical being, right? Like, I think going into the gym, whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter. Going into the gym with a notebook and pen and turning the music off, right? And just kind of doing your thing, whether it's squatting, whether it's pulling a sled, whether it's practicing handstands, whether you're stretching, and just allowing the mind to go where it goes. I really, really enjoy pulling a sled for about 20 to 30 minutes, right? With lights off, music off, and I'm just monotonously pulling this thing 20 meters, spinning it around and pulling it back 20 meters. And that's it. I'm just going for 30 minutes, right? And the stuff that comes out of my brain in that time is unimaginable. I'm like, if I'd have sat at the desk, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about the fact that at all layers movement is happening. So this idea of capital M movement, which is not just related to movement of the physical body, but you're referring to even subtler movement of thoughts, movement of emotions. We have even, we could break it down to the biochemical movement, all the interactions that are happening when you're doing that, lactic acid, all this physiological input that's happening. Um, yeah, it's always there. I think if there's anything that I really try and promote or put out there, is this idea that it can be, yeah, like you said, all of it. So generally we focus externally, in the quantifiable objective world. But what you're mentioning is this more subjective experience, which arguably is the only experience.
Yeah.
Everything is subjective, but paying attention to these qualities that are below the surface. So you take away the music, it's external. You take away, in this case, you mentioned the dark room, it's external. You have the inward experience of what's actually going on, and that medium of sensations, thinking, what we're perceiving, etc., is what we have to work with. Those are the ways that we filter the world around us. So the more clearly we understand that, I think it does help us go back into external, externalizations of practice, let's say, and even work with that more profoundly or clearly. So we have this, yeah, this like above and below, top, bottom, however you want to think about it, but we recognize that it's actually all one thing that we can arguably work with.
Mm.
And I think it's also interesting, the meditations, Marcus Aurelius, it's said that he wrote that in a way that was for himself. It wasn't
Mm.
meant to be seen by anybody. And I think there's something in that related to practice itself as well. I mean, I shared something this morning on social relating to the thousands of videos that I'll take in my individual practice that actually never get shown. It's more about me seeing it for me. And I think, I'd imagine part of you doing this podcast, we talked about it before, is for you.
Mm.
You get to interview these other people and you learn, and you also get to share that. But at the end of the day, it's for you to understand you. And that thing, whatever that is for somebody, is, in my opinion, the directive to new life, new growth, novelty, complexity, all of these kind of expansion moments.
Yeah,
So,
man. I completely agree. Like stumbling onto this thing, out of desperation, just to help some folk, especially somebody back home, very close friend of mine. And it's now become this place of learning. I can take a dip into these fascinating minds around the world that, more likely than not, we're never going to pass each other in the street, right? Like, I would never have a pull factor to go to Costa Rica, or like some random place in Saudi Arabia, right? But now you've kind of heard somebody speak, and you've heard a perspective and their experience and their story, or at least a little bit of it, and you're like, oh, now I have a pull factor to go there. and it has become this amalgamation and this melting pot of knowledge, and it really does help me out, and it's in fact shown me uh how much of a learner I need to be able to talk to people. It's like, okay, well, I learn from talking to people and then go out and doing it, because throughout the rest of my day, I'll be thinking about the answers to the questions, the conversation, where it went, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, how did they arrive at this point? Because I would have gone somewhere completely different, right? And then
Yeah.
why did they arrive there? And why would I arrive in a different place? And then you learn from it, right? Rather than
Yeah.
this textbook one way of learning of an education system. And it's proven to me, oh, okay, cool. Like, you can be a pretty decent learner. You've just got to learn in different ways.
Yeah, and people have their process. I like this idea of, it seems a bit linear, but collecting data, the data is informative, which then creates this knowledge base, which through the work, in this case, we could say in a physical practice, creates wisdom. And the wisdom is the bucket of, uh, continuing insights, or it's the wellspring of continuing insights. I think it can be often challenging to get stuck in data and information, specifically in the world we live in. And, if you think of like traditional schooling, it's mostly data and information based. It's not oriented at the me or at what I am actually curious about. It's often in school. I know, like, even me going through my college work, my college courses, it wasn't until the very end that I got to the work I was interested in.
Mm,
So I think, you and I talked a little bit about this previously, but I think, we definitely live in a world that doesn't prioritize this curiosity early on.
mm,
And we almost become conditioned or, um, put through a system that it doesn't really teach us to be curious. And, this falls into some of the the quotes that are out there around unlearning. It's like you learn all of this information and collect all this data, and then part of the knowledge and wisdom process is the unlearning of that, what you connected. And so I think the data information ends up being connected in some way. Once we're able to realign with that curiosity, we can take all this information that was there and start to work with it. We connect the dots. And so there's collecting, connecting, but most of the connecting pieces aren't often taught.
mm.
It maybe can't be taught. There's an argument there that you can't teach curiosity, but you can facilitate the time and space for it. And so I think this is a big jump in both education. I'm not an educator in that way, but I think there's a potential opportunity there, as well as, something that I continue to pull up in my own practice and want to relay to people, which is, movement can look different than what we've been handed. It doesn't have to be, that we go through this process and this is what we've got. I've got a barbell, this is it. I've got these machines, this is it. It can actually be a place of curiosity and learning. It can be in the gym or out of the gym. It can be with found objects, and all of those things eventually circle back to the medium is you. The medium is your curiosity and taking that where it wants to go. So yeah, again, we talked a lot about curiosity last time, but I think, this process of integration involves taking all of these pieces, all of the data and information, and connecting it in a way that makes sense and aligns with those curiosities.
Dude, since that last time of curiosity, I've been thinking about it every day, man.
Great, good deal.
And
Yeah.
I think we're facilitators, you know, real basic ground level, kind of the meatheads that like to move around with the body rather than, stereotypically glasses on, just use the mind. But I think that's how we're doing it. We are using the mind by using the body, going that body mind
Yes. Yeah.
that you were
Yeah.
talking about, right? And I think we have a role of a facilitator, we bring people in, whether it's physically into a brick and mortar gym, or we allow people to understand this new concept through the internet or whatever, just by talking to people. And we facilitate somebody's growth through that and facilitate their curiosity through that, right? A lot of the time, after being around someone like ourselves, they have more questions than answers. And I think that is the point. I think we're supposed to question things. You know, going back to the mainstream education system, we're taught to instantaneously have the answer, right? And if you don't have the answer, go find that one answer that there is to that one question, right? And there's never really one answer, right? There's usually, well, it depends, you know, because it depends on a great deal of things. And it's not just a tick box exercise. Congratulations, you remembered it. It's well, if that's the answer, what's the question? You know, and I think that is the meaning of life essentially is figuring out the right question, because then it uncovers the right part of the answer, because the answer is all around, right? We live on the earth, the universe. I think the answer is all around. I kind of subject myself to that school of thought of, if the universe is the answer, then what's the question? You know, a little bit of philosophy and physics in there. And I think that's the thing. You know, if we're the answer, what's the question? If this relationship is the answer, then what's the question? And once you then figure that out, you then I think the to-do list of what's next just comes to you. You know, you just have to be curious enough to be like, well, I got my bias. Where is the other side? You know, we're not looking at it from two sides. It's spherical. It's so many different ways we can think about this. So how do we do it? Maybe it needs less weight. Maybe I need to be less assertive. Maybe I need to learn a different communication style. Like it can be adapted in so many different ways, you know, and we've learned to be this super one-dimensional human being, right? Where I can only go on a machine, I can only sit at a desk, I can only, you know, do X, Y, Z. You're like, that's just an answer. What is your question?
Yeah, and I think one thing that comes up that you're pointing to is this open-endedness of
Mm,
the question. You know, this will show up often for me in practice when either I am feeling time crunched and I recognize it. So there's the awareness that, wow, there's a block here. Um, or it feels like maybe something's been handed to me that I'm just conditioned to follow. That happens as well. So the question I'll often use for myself in practice specifically is, what new wants to be seen here, or what is new here? And in that, there's a looking that happens. I think one of the things that you're bringing up with the conditioning element is, if we're going through a process or we're going through life automatically, there is very little room for awareness, this openness. And it's not until we're obviously aware that, okay, I just, am conditioned. Let's use a physical practice as an example. I am conditioned just to do what's always been there, jump on the machine, not think about it. Um, then ultimately we're limited in that perspective by our awareness. And so these open-ended questions for me have been part of that process for something new to show up, a new idea, a new perspective, a new way of, placing the hand on the floor, or entering into this particular sequence, or taking a concept within strength and using something else to get the same, you know arrive at the same place or a similar place. So I think, ultimately some people would say, okay, it all comes down to awareness. But there's a I can't say there's any sort of methodology for it, but we go back to where we started, there's a space that's required for this emerging. So oftentimes I think, learning to cultivate that space might be one of the more important lessons in life. And that could be literally just like being still for 5 minutes,
mm,
or it could be, like you said, going into a physical practice, taking the headset off, really reducing the noise and allowing for these other sensitivities to emerge. So, there there's plenty of personal evidence to show that as noise goes up, sensitivity goes down. Like we've all experienced this. You're in a loud arena and like things are happening, and you no longer notice that your left ankle hurts. There's just like so much outward, you know, it could be both outward and inward, but there's so much happening that the dial is really cranked that you can't pick up on things that were there without it. So
Mm.
I think by reducing a lot of this, and this leads into, technology, eliminating technology, at least for a time, you going to the bush and experiencing what you experience, like you're essentially on purpose reducing that noise so that something new can emerge in its place. So I think this is, I think it's a lesson in or an argument for taking that space and being okay with maybe starting simple, being okay with like 5 minutes of nothing. Even if it ends up being 5 minutes of thinking, it's still 5 minutes away from something else that would have taken that space. So
I agree, man. We've increased this communication, right? But I would argue, have we increased connectivity and connection? And I would also argue no, right? And I think we've just put more things on our plate, but we're not actually getting through it. We're doing 10 tasks to 30% capacity rather than just doing a really good job on one, right? And how many times do we just sit there and just think these days? It's like, no, I'm just, you know, I'm waiting for somebody at the GP or the dentist or something. Cool, I'm going to scroll on my phone
yeah,
and do
yeah,
stuff like that, right? It's like, no, how many times you just sit there and think? I
yeah,
remember doing it as a kid, like all the time, obviously, because you've not got anything. You just kind of sat there waiting for your mom, and that's your thing. You just think and you daydream and you have a imagination, you go off in it, right? Um, and now it's like, oh, I could be working. It's
yeah,
like you
yeah. And
could
those
be.
those are, yeah, you're kind of robbing yourself of those me moments. And I'm very much aware of this myself now, and it's difficult. Like if it's like I go to the doctor or I go, like you said, I've got to go get my car inspected today. Like I could sit and do nothing. The temptation to do something it's just like it's there. It's pulling. And I think, again, going back to the argument of even like a physical practice, in practice, we start to cultivate these constraints that allow for us to practice that. This is an argument for, in something like the handstand, the amount of focus and sensitivity that's required to access that particular skill is the same thing that then does get taken into, for example, the office, because you're building a container for this focus, this clarity, and it becomes more of the norm. It also becomes rewarding in its own way. You're like, wow, I'm sure I'm more present with people, or people are giving me feedback now that like you know, um, I'm more available. And so then that starts to have its own reward system, but it's difficult. It's difficult. I mean, yeah, it's coming at us from all angles, and I'm sure in your case too, there can be an element of that is attached to maybe, we could say, survival, making a living, getting, kind of getting these things out in the world to be relevant, etc. So it can get a little bit muddy that way as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to make a really big conscious push, especially as technology gets faster and faster, right? And we can work quicker and we can cross communicate over time zones like we're doing now, which is awesome. I think we're going to have to make a really conscious decision of, okay, when I'm working, I'm fucking working. Like
Hmm.
I'm full in, whether it's in the comfort of your own home or the office, right? And most of the time now it's the first one. People are working from home a lot more for post COVID, right? And then I think people are gonna disappear. I think we're gonna have more of these retreats. I think we're gonna have more of these like mindful meditation sessions, yoga in out in the bush. I think that's going to have to be the case, finding that balance of, all right, we're speeding everything up. That's fantastic. And I think that's going to help a lot of people, but we also have to consciously slow everything back down again. Otherwise, stress goes up, anxiety goes up, burnout goes up, sleep goes down, quality of social interactions goes down. And it's like, well, what are we anymore? We're just robots, right?
Yeah.
It's like we are
Yeah. And I
people.
think,
We're losing that beauty.
yeah, I think there's a skill to that as well. There's probably the camp that is more willpower oriented. Like you said, okay, I've got to work. I've got to focus. I've got to basically crack the whip on attention.
Mm.
And then there's the other camp, which I would say more so I fall into. I've done the discipline camp before. I mean, that's how I got to some of the skills in my practice, but arguably that has a high cost. And that cost is it shows up in many, many different realms. But you realize that this idea of maybe effortless effort, where you're not cracking the whip, you're not disciplining the mind, you're allowing it to follow some sort of path that allows for this, we could say, idea of untapped energy to
Mm.
do the thing, to do the task, and recognizing initially when it is distracted. So it's maybe, again, I go to get my car inspected and I have this idea of just sitting in that moment and allowing for this newness to be with myself. But then I feel this urge to pull up my social media and I see it, but maybe I still pull up the social media. Well, eventually, in the seeing of it is the answer for not doing it, but it's not through willpower. I think it happens through this ongoing awareness of it.
Mm.
So, this is the difference between mindfulness and this openness of awareness. So, mindfulness would say, no, correct it, bring it back, versus watch it, allow it to unfold. And eventually, in seeing, that is the action. The seeing of it is all that's needed, because eventually that decision or another decision or to go with it is the decision that is made. And the way I think about that, to kind of wrap that thought up, is that in any given moment, even if I see it in awareness, the decision that I make is the best decision for that time. So, this idea that we're always doing the best we can in any given moment, we can't go back and fix the previous moments. We can see it, maybe have some sort of reflective process of it, and then in the future, make a different decision that, again, isn't forceful, it's allowing.
Right.
So, yeah, I think these are tools that have to also be communicated, like you said, shared thought, educated on, and then honed through some sort of process to allow people to fulfill that.
Dude, I love that thought process. That is fascinating. Again, it's going to be
Yeah,
stuck with
it's
me for the few weeks that is going to be in between, man.
well, this is an ongoing project for me, allowing versus forcing. It's been a tricky one for sure.
I
Yeah.
think um I think we're both in that boat, man.
Yeah.
Especially coming from a Western world that says, hey, go grind, go earn your living through grinding. It's like,
Yeah.
well, we've done that. You've learned the lesson that you needed to during that. Cool. So that's probably not yours for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you still can't grind. It just
Mm,
means that, like, it's a grinding based from that curiosity. It's
mm,
like behind curiosity is grind.
mm.
It's like I'm gonna obsess about the thing, I'm gonna get into the thing and it's gonna happen, but it's in full alignment. And in that alignment, the energy behind it is it's endless, as far
Mm.
as I can tell.
Brother,
Yeah.
thank you so much, man.
Man, this is great. I'm glad we made this happen.
Yeah, we got it to the end this time.
Yeah, yeah, it's good, man.
Dude,
It's
I
good.
appreciate it. And if you take anything else from away from this, it'd be just be curious.
Be curious. I love it, man. Yeah,
Thank
we
you,
don't need
brother.
much more. Yeah,
No,
thank
man.
you.
We'll talk soon.